My stepson tried to frame me for hitting him to get insurance money. The bruise makeup he used washed off too easily. Everything started falling apart when I noticed the water bill was 3 times higher than usual last month. Living in a small Texas town where everyone knows everyone, I'd been married to my wife for 4 years, and her 17-year-old son had always been a challenge. The kid was smart, way too smart for his own good, and had this unsettling way of watching people like he was calculating something behind those dark eyes. The first red flag should have been when he started acting unusually nice to me around the house. For weeks he'd been sulking and giving me the cold shoulder treatment, which was pretty normal for him. But suddenly he was offering to help with yard work and asking about my day at the plant. My wife thought it was progress, that maybe he was finally warming up to me after all these years. The whole situation got weird when I caught him researching personal injury lawyers online. When I asked him about it, he claimed it was for a school project about the legal system. Made sense at the time, but looking back, that should have been my second warning sign. The kid had never shown interest in anything school-related before, spending most of his time gaming or hanging out with his sketchy friends from the next town over. Things escalated when our neighbor mentioned seeing him talking to some older guys near the abandoned gas station on the outskirts of town. These weren't local kids, and they definitely weren't the type you'd want your teenager associating with. When I brought it up with my wife, she got defensive and said I was being paranoid about her son. The conversation ended with her storming out and not speaking to me for 2 days. The insurance angle became clear when I overheard him on the phone one night, talking about how much money someone could get for being assaulted by a family member. He was speaking quietly, but our house has thin walls and I was in the kitchen getting water. The conversation lasted about 20 minutes, and I heard him mention specific dollar amounts that made my stomach drop. This wasn't casual curiosity anymore. I started paying closer attention to his behavior after that phone call. He began asking strange questions about my work schedule and when I'd be home alone with him. The questions felt calculated, like he was gathering information for something specific. My wife was working evening shifts at the hospital those weeks, leaving us alone together most nights until she got home around midnight. The morning everything went sideways, I woke up to find him sitting at the kitchen table with what looked like a pretty convincing black eye. The bruising was dark purple and extended from his cheekbone to his temple, exactly the kind of injury that would photograph well for documentation. He was sitting there calmly eating cereal, waiting for me to notice, like he'd been rehearsing this moment in his head. His story was that I'd hit him the night before during an argument about his grades. The problem was, we hadn't argued about anything, and I'd spent the entire evening watching television in the living room while he was supposedly in his room. He claimed I'd been drinking, which was impossible since I'd been sober for 3 years and my wife knew it. The whole narrative felt scripted and rehearsed. What really caught my attention was how perfect the bruise looked. In my younger days, I'd seen plenty of real black eyes from bar fights and accidents, and they never looked that uniform or that dramatically colored. Real bruises have irregular edges and varying shades, but this one looked like something from a movie makeup department. The coloring was too consistent and too vibrant for something that supposedly happened 12 hours earlier. When I suggested we go to the emergency room to get him checked out, he immediately became nervous and started making excuses. He said he didn't want to make a big deal out of it, which was completely out of character for someone who normally dramatized every minor inconvenience. A real victim would want medical attention, not try to avoid it while simultaneously threatening to call the police. The breakthrough came when I insisted on taking photos for our own records before doing anything else. I told him if we were going to deal with this situation, we needed proper documentation from our perspective too. As I was adjusting the lighting in the kitchen to get a clear shot, I noticed something strange about the way the bruise was sitting on his skin. The edges looked slightly raised, like there was something between the coloring and his actual skin. When I got closer with the camera, I could see tiny gaps where whatever he'd used wasn't perfectly adhered to his face. It reminded me of those temporary tattoos kids use, except this was more sophisticated and designed to look like trauma. I decided to test my theory by suggesting he wash his face before we took any official photos. Told him it would look better for documentation if he cleaned up a bit first, made the injury more visible against clean skin. He immediately protested, saying water would make it hurt worse, which made no sense since bruises don't react to water that way. When I persisted and handed him a warm washcloth, he reluctantly went to the bathroom. I followed and watched as he very carefully dabbed around the edges of the bruise, avoiding the center completely. That's when I knew for certain what I was dealing with, but I needed to see how far he'd take this charade before confronting him. The moment of truth came when I accidentally splashed some water directly onto the bruise while helping him clean up. The purple coloring immediately started running and smearing, revealing the pale skin underneath. It wasn't makeup in the traditional sense, but some kind of transfer or temporary coloring that was designed to look realistic but wasn't meant to get wet. His face went completely white when he saw the purple streaks running down his cheek. All the confidence and calculation drained out of his expression, replaced by the look of someone who'd been caught red-handed. He started stammering about how the bruise must be healing faster than expected, trying to salvage his story even as the evidence was literally washing down the drain. The real shock came when I found the packaging in his trash can later that morning. It was professional-grade special effects makeup, the kind used in theater and film production. This wasn't some cheap Halloween costume accessory, but expensive materials that would have cost him serious money. The receipt showed he'd ordered it online 3 weeks earlier, proving this whole scheme had been planned well in advance. What really got to me was discovering the research he'd done about insurance payouts for domestic violence cases. His browser history showed weeks of searches about settlement amounts, how to document injuries, and which lawyers handled personal injury cases. He'd even looked up the specific requirements for filing claims against step-parents in our state, showing just how thoroughly he'd planned this whole operation. The insurance angle became crystal clear when I found printed emails between him and what appeared to be a claims adjuster from our homeowner's insurance company. He'd already initiated contact and was in preliminary discussions about a potential claim. The adjuster was asking for medical records and police reports, which explained why he was so eager to involve law enforcement in his fake story. But the biggest revelation came when I discovered he hadn't been working alone. Those older guys our neighbor had seen him with weren't random troublemakers, but part of some kind of insurance fraud ring that recruited teenagers for these schemes. The plan was to target step-parents and adoptive parents, people who might be more vulnerable to accusations and less likely to fight back legally. The whole operation was more sophisticated than I'd imagined. They'd provided him with the makeup materials, coached him on how to apply them realistically, and even helped him research the legal and financial aspects of his target. In exchange, he was supposed to split any settlement money with them, keeping a percentage for himself while they moved on to recruit the next kid. When I confronted him with all the evidence, he finally broke down and admitted everything. He'd gotten involved with these people because he needed money for something he wouldn't tell me about, and they'd convinced him this was easy money with minimal risk. The plan was to file the insurance claim, get a settlement, and disappear before anyone could investigate too thoroughly. The scariest part was learning how close he'd come to succeeding. If I hadn't noticed the water bill anomaly and started paying closer attention to his behavior, he might have pulled it off. The fake bruise was convincing enough to fool most people, and his story was plausible enough to raise serious questions about my character in our small community. Dealing with the aftermath was complicated because we had to involve law enforcement, but not in the way he'd originally planned. The insurance fraud ring was apparently operating across multiple states, targeting families with teenage children and recruiting them into elaborate schemes. My stepson's case became part of a larger investigation that eventually led to several arrests. The hardest part was explaining everything to my wife when she got home from work that night. She'd walked into what looked like a normal morning and found her son's entire life turned upside down. The evidence was overwhelming, but accepting that her child had tried to frame me for assault was devastating for her. She blamed herself for not seeing the signs earlier. Our marriage survived, but it took months of rebuilding trust and dealing with the legal complications. The insurance company launched their own investigation, and we had to prove that no actual assault had occurred. The whole process was exhausting and expensive, involving lawyers and private investigators to clear my name completely. My stepson ended up in juvenile detention for several months while the case was sorted out. The experience seemed to shake him out of whatever mindset had led him to this point, but the damage to our family relationships was significant. Trust, once broken in such a calculated way, doesn't rebuild easily or quickly. The broader investigation revealed that this type of fraud was becoming more common, as these criminal networks realized how effective teenagers could be at manipulating family situations. The combination of sophisticated materials and coaching made their schemes increasingly difficult to detect until it was too late. Looking back, I realize how many small warning signs I'd missed or dismissed as typical teenage behavior. The sudden friendliness, the unusual questions, the research activities, even the increased water usage from practicing his makeup application techniques. All of it should have added up to a clearer picture of what was happening. The experience taught me that family relationships are more fragile than I'd realized, and that even people you think you know can surprise you in devastating ways. It also showed me how important it is to trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you can't immediately explain why. The resolution came when the insurance fraud ring was finally dismantled and several of its members prosecuted. My stepson's cooperation with the investigation helped reduce his own legal consequences, but the experience left lasting scars on everyone involved. The whole ordeal lasted almost a year from start to finish. Now, several years later, we've rebuilt our family relationships to some degree, but things are different. There's an underlying awareness that deception is possible even within families, and that trust requires constant attention and care. The experience changed all of us in ways we're still discovering and processing. The strangest part is how ordinary everything seemed right up, until the moment I saw that purple makeup running down his face. One moment I was dealing with what appeared to be a serious family crisis, and the next I was uncovering an elaborate criminal conspiracy. The line between normal family drama and serious fraud turned out to be much thinner than I'd ever imagined.